Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of DevOps Unbound. Yes, you're here back on DevOps Unbound with us again. We have a great topic today, another fantastic panel. My partner in crime, my co-founder, Alan Schimmel, is on a world tour somewhere. Who knows where on the planet he is today, but he's off doing some important work and not able to join us today. So I'm doing both co-hosting moderating duties. So I don't know how you do that, but anyway, we'll jump right into it. Hey, I want to say thank you to the folks at Tricentis. Tricentis sponsors this show, which brings a lot of things with it. Brings a unique perspective to add it to some of the conversation and topics, and thinking about speakers. And we co-collaborate on that and work together on how we kind of think about different topics. Sometimes it's about testing, sometimes it's not. So I want to thank Lanier and the team at Tricentis, and also Jody, our executive producer of the show. So why don't we jump right into our topic? I'm going to start by introducing our panel, and just to kind of give you a flavor, teeing this up, this is part of a building blocks series, part 2, powering up your automated testing. So Tracy, would you kick off introductions?
Absolutely, Mitch. Good to see you again. And sorry, Alan couldn't be with us. He always adds a little bit of a flair to these.
Yeah, he does.
I am Tracy Ragan. I am the CEO of DeployHub, and I also manage an open source community called Ortelius. And I'm honored to say I also do Tech Strong Women for Tech Strong TV.
Fantastic. And who should introduce themselves next?
I'm sorry. How about Raju?
There you go.
Hello, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I'm Raju, one of the principal architect at Software Quality and Release Organization in T-Mobile. As part of my job, I try to focus on 2 things: increase automation, have more reusability. And that's where I build the architectural solution to help my organization. Martin, you are next.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us. I apologize in advance for my voice. I just got over a bad cold, so you can probably hear this just a little bit, but I promise it's getting better, and I'm glad we're on Zoom, so I'm not sharing too much or more than I wanted on the call today. But my name is Martin Klaus. I lead custom engineering at Tricentis, which is a new role. And the charter for us at custom engineering is to help drive the adoption of more automation across multiple disciplines, but also including generative AI and some of those new technologies, and to capture those building blocks and blueprints that we can sort of scale out across the entire install base.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. And I introduced myself. I'm CTO at TechStrong Group and also run our analyst business at TechStrong Research. So let's jump into our topic. We're talking about this in the context of DevOps, and there are a few core principles around kind of implementing DevOps, and there's a lot of flexibility about how you do it. But one of them is automation, right? We're trying to increase the velocity, shorten cycles, produce software more quickly. And of course, to do that, you have to automate a lot of things. And just kind of sharing my own background, in running engineering teams and being part of delivering products and softwares and IT is, testing is so extremely important. You want to automate to improve quality and maximize your resources. It's also a double-edged sword. You don't want to spend all your time maintaining tests either, right? So what do you automate? What are the best strategies for doing automation? And how do you fit that into a DevOps pipeline, into a workflow process, into pipelines of work that's traveling through, a DevOps cycles that are landing into test environments and production environments eventually. So we're going to talk about that. And Tracy, I'm going to go back to you to kind of kick us off. I'm curious, you have such a great sense of software engineering and software architecture. How do you think of testing and test automation, and how you put that into context of a DevOps workflow pipeline?
Well, thank you for saying that. Well, I really think that testing has been sorely overlooked over the years. We hear all kinds of things about the DevOps pipeline. We talk about the build, we talk about the deployment. We might even talk about, source code analysis. but we don't talk about testing enough in the DevOps pipeline. It is, it gets forgotten, unfortunately. And it's such a critical piece of the DevOps pipeline that these conversations about adding testing and making sure testing is part of the automation process is really critical. Now, there's different kinds of testing, and maybe you can't add all testing to the DevOps pipeline. But I think if we think about the traditional pyramid, kind of unit testing, functional testing, for example, user acceptance testing, the areas that we really should be focused on automating, especially in a kind of decoupled environment where we have functions and we have contracts, is the unit testing. Unit testing should absolutely be part of the DevOps pipeline. And if you're not doing that, you're missing a big component.
Amazing. Raj, I'd love you to jump in. First time guest, long time listener, right? First time welcome.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Tracy. Testing was definitely forgotten, or it's being forgotten. We will be looked only when there are issues in the production, right? But in order to have more automation in DevOps, we need to see what are the things that needs to be automated, right? Basically, what are the things that can be easily automated to get started? So if at all we're talking about the unit testing, we are focusing only on a specific piece of code. However, when we are talking about the entire module or a functionality, we need to focus on the integration testing, right? We need to mature enough from the unit level to the integration level, so that now you are not only focusing on a single component, you are making sure that when that particular component is deployed, it is talking to that other components that are dependent on this particular component properly, right? That's where we need to focus on. As Tracy said, probably we may not be able to incorporate all the automation into the DevOps. However, at least when we go step by step from unit to integration, because integration will be in the API level, it will allow us to automate quicker. It will allow us to do it faster. And slowly we can ramp up to the functional. Slowly we can ramp up to the UAT, right? However, and also we need to think about, okay, now the automation is running. How do we make sure that what is going to happen if the automation fails? What is the criteria for us to say, okay, if these test cases are failing, then roll back my code. If these test cases are passing, then don't roll back my code. So that criteria needs to be defined properly.
Yeah, I heard a talk. It was at the end of 2019, the last conference I went to a FinOS conference in New York in December. And there was I don't remember the bank, but there was a bank there talking about what you just described. And they had created truth tables to make those decisions based on particular modules. I thought it was a fascinating way to see and they added that automation into their DevOps, their testing pipeline. So they had a DevOps pipeline and they also had a testing pipeline, but in their testing pipeline, they added truth tables to do what you just described.
Yeah, because that is going to definitely help the people who are actually working on the deployment, right? We don't want to blindly roll back the code if some test cases are failing. Having a best criteria to decide what should be the true decision to deploy or not deploy.
Mm-hmm. If I could just add something to the point that Raju made, which is that most companies have their own way of deploying features and releases into production, right? And so the automation really needs to fit that model, because some organizations have deployed, feature flagging as a way to introduce new functionality to the customers. Other companies use A/B type deployments, or other companies are actually have an ongoing sort of opt-in beta program where they're basically, leading with new features, and then you can roll back to the classic or the not yet fully GA'd version of the software. And in any of these scenarios, and I'm sure there's nuances to that as well, that has an impact on how you think about test automation, because you may not be able to do full end-to-end test automation in a staging or queue environment when you have production data that actually is very critical from an automation standpoint. And you have to think about, what can be tested automatically in a pre-prod staging environment, and what actually do you want to test in production as part of like a shift right strategy. because you just can't replicate your production environment, at high fidelity in a development environment. And so it really depends on like how you think about your delivery process. How do you think about, the way you introduce new functionality? How do you think about, test automation in the context and what can be done on a developer's laptop as part of a unit testing mechanism, and what can be done later stages before it hits sort of the G environment as well.
Yeah.
And we're really focused on code testing. Let's make it clear we're talking about code testing, not pen testing or other kinds of testing that you may want to do in your production environment and must do in your production environment. But I think the concept of being okay with understanding that you still may be continuing testing even after you do a production release is important. Because to be quite honest, we never stop testing. Our end users eventually might be the last testers because they're the ones that often find our bugs.
Or the ultimate testers.
They're the ultimate testers. They are the ultimate testers. But how do we, make sure that they don't find as many as we might in the earlier stages? And that's where the automation has become so critical. But what I have found is that when you look at a lot of these, when you look at a lot of pipelines and you're looking at how people are constructing their testing, they may run just one test script. They may use a Selenium and feel that that's going to be sufficient. And I think what's important to understand is there is context to testing. And sometimes adding additional tooling helps improve the overall quality of the software because you have context around it. I can't really explain that perfectly, but there's more to just scanning code. Let's just put it that way.
Let me jump in on that, because one of the things I wanted to highlight is, I no longer think of testing as a discrete function. I think of it as a continuous process from the moment code's checked in. Maybe I even run some tests before I check in code, but that in that build process, right? We think of DevOps and kind of the center of the picture. At least people start with CI/CD, but it's more than that. It's more than the integration process that's kicking off. It's the test process that's kicking off. Matter of fact, that can happen when, just code check in. And I think, so it's continuous happening, whether you're doing it on your own developed machine, if it's part of the workflow of checking in code, doing builds, and then also pushing code into test environments. And one of the things that you said, Martin, also, I think is because of automation, we can push code for testing into multiple environments, right? How many times do we have to test different versions of the products or different feature flags turned on? Or, we've had to separate, and we run multiple systems because of separating customer data because we're not multi-tenant or whatever it might be. There's always cases where we need to go back and fix something in a prior version, or maybe we're running multiple environments and we have to be able to test across that. Doing that manually just wouldn't be practical, not on any scale. And that to me is sort of one of the end results of having tests automated is by the time it reaches that step, it's already been tested hundreds, maybe thousands of times with test scripts that kick off at different points in that process. So that's why I like to think about it as the flow of how testing happens, not testing happens here.
Yeah, and the success of this also depends on the how good your configuration management is, right? How good you are understanding which code is going to be deployed when, and we understanding because of this particular code what functionality is impacted. Until that configuration management is not in place, then you will not see the success into what you are trying to achieve in the DevOps automation, because you need to understand what exactly needs to be tested. As Tracy said, if at all you just have one unit test case just to check the checkbox and to say, oh, my DevOps is everything is automated in my DevOps, right? Having one test case is not going to suffice you, right? Understanding what exactly needs to be tested, why it needs to be tested is important.
And Raju, you said the magic word that nobody ever says. I hardly ever hear anybody use the term configuration management.
Yep.
It is the essence of everything we do through the DevOps pipeline, and this new conversation around supply chain, whether you want to call it CI/CD, but configuration management is the essence of everything that we do, and it's so important and critical to testing. So, for example, key value pairs can really ruin your day, If you have two key value pairs in two different environments are acting differently, it's really hard to find those kind of hidden configurations. And that's why configuration management has been a discussion for years. But I feel like it's been forgotten, kind of like testing gets forgotten. So I really love that you're bringing back that term. It's super critical, and I hope our audience understands that it's not just an old term. We're still doing it.
Yep. And it also allows us to eliminate the duplicate testing, right? If at all you understand, based on the configuration management, you will be able to understand what exactly is going to change, why it is going to get changed. And now once you define that particular package, now you understand what exactly needs to be tested. So you're not over testing it, and you're also not repeating the testing over a period of time, whether it is automated or manual. Forget about it. But are we doing the right testing? That's key. And in order to make that as a key, you need to make sure that you understand your configuration management better.
And when are we done testing? Because one of the things that I hear sometimes from customers is there's this enormous test matrix that starts to explode every time you add a requirement and you add a new business rule, or you think about exceptions and what that means in terms of implications on your test matrix. And while you think you have a fairly comprehensive test matrix, there's always the sort of the doubt of like, is this it, or have we not covered a particular edge case or a situation that is not in the happy path, but it's sort of at the intersection of multiple business rules and exceptions conflicting with another, and you can only find it out when you're actually taking the application through its paces in production. And so one thought that I've been thinking about is like, if we assume that you're never going to be done, or done, there's always something that you're not going to catch before you go live, but it's going to happen after go live. And as Tracy mentioned, the end users are the ultimate testers, because eventually somebody's going to run into that situation at some point in time. And how do we sort of identify that and have more of a sort of a rapid response approach to the situation to say, we assume that we're not going to be 100% complete ever. There's always going to be a certain percentage of things that will not catch. But if that happens, then how do we then sort of identify that situation and respond to it as quickly as possible? So this whole idea of observability integrated with test automation might be an important topic for us to think about in the future, to say, slow us into downtime, but maybe there's some other early indicators that would sort of allow us to detect when these sort of edge cases and situations occur, that we can then as a jump on it, fix it, but then also then capture that situation and add that to a regression suite for the future, right? Because it's an important sort of situation that we haven't thought of before.
Yeah. And I think, as we all know, right, testing cannot be done. It's always we are going to test. But in order to do the right testing, we need to make sure that we prioritize our test cases. The prioritization is very important, right? What is my key priority, right? What are my test cases that if I run, I know these many customers are going to be getting impacted, right? If these are the customers, so you'll be able to prioritize your test cases, and then you run your test cases through that.
Yeah, dependencies become part of that configuration discussion too, right? All the way down to transitive dependencies. The more we talk about open source security and SBOMs and trying to understand what you're consuming, there's an argument to say that if an open source module that you're pulling in your package that's a transitive dependencies, that should actually kick off a new test. But we really can't see that deeply into some of these packages. And if we look at the higher level, the organizational level, in a decoupled environment, in a microservices environment, which happens to be one of my favorite topics, because it really makes production look like this massive transformer, and you're updating components all day long. And Raju, as you pointed out, the integration testing is so critical. How do you continually do that? How do you continually test these integrations? As we're doing agile development, we're doing microservices, we've decoupled everything, and one single microservice could blow up several applications. So the configuration management becomes even more essential. Understanding dependencies become more essential. And personally, I think that kind of intelligence should be part of the DevOps pipeline and pass to testing tools, because that shows where the risk is. So in other words, if you have a you have a login routine that everybody's using because you want to standardize it and you want to make sure it's secure, and it gets updated. That has a higher risk value than other something else that might just be changing the color of a window frame. So how do you understanding when you should test, what you should test, and the risk value is something that we should be gathering and reporting on through the DevOps pipeline to make it easier to do that testing.
Completely agree. And apart from this discussion, what we have done so far, I think we also need to, in order to be more successful into the automation space, you need to make sure that you are talking about the test data, right? Without the proper test data, you will not be able to succeed in the automation, right? Whether you have built a proper solid script that is going to run, but the goal of automation is to run, right? If at all we don't have a proper test data defined for those test cases, then you will fail, right? Either the people who are going to run the automation is going to get frustrated to understand why the tests are failing, though I did my best job to build a proper script, and they'll spend too much of time triaging if at all we don't have the best test data. And then the second thing is, when they are building this particular automation, in order to be more efficient, we need to think about the reusability concept, right? You build your automation in such a way that you have a reusable block that can be used between the test cases, so that you're not scripting entire so for example, if at all you want to talk about login, login was automated. Now the next thing is, I want to make sure that I want to do something on the dashboard. So already login was automated. If at all you want to leverage the dashboard test scenarios, leverage the login that was automated, stitches together, and then you have that reusability. So that way you're spending right amount of time and right amount of energy to build a proper test case.
I have a question for everyone, and thank you, Raju, for that. Do you think about testing differently? Do you approach it differently when you know you're going to be integrating it into a DevOps pipeline versus maybe traditional software development, where we're doing Agile or not doing DevOps and have tool chains that are integrated, things like that? Are there different thought patterns or considerations that you need to make?
Yeah, the thought pattern is to make sure that you are just not writing a test case, just someone told you to write a test case or build an automation test case because someone told you to. You need to understand, as we discussed earlier, right? You need to understand why, what is required, and how do I implement it, and how do I have that particular dependency to ask yourself whether I'm doing the right testing for this particular changes.
Anybody else perspective on that?
I've thought about that, my brain really, it has hardened in this area. So sometimes it's hard to relax it, because I still always think about that traditional pyramid, that we have to go through. But I do think that we should be breaking down testing into a more modern bits and pieces, because that's where we're headed. And it may be the case that we don't always have the benefit of that traditional pyramid. Like I said, in the microservices environment, I think we have to really see how we can do testing differently in that case. I don't think we can always have it's impossible to have a single microservice go through absolutely everything. So yeah, we have some work to do in that area, Mitch. I think it's a good topic.
It's interesting because you almost have to design your testing like you would design software. Think about it as a modular, like an API first, if you're thinking microservices kind of a design, right? It's not one big monolith suite of tests that you want to run. And to your point, Raj, we talk about the tests themselves. It's the data that ultimately matters, because that's also what's going to drive logic through paths in the code or not. Right. And represent, the flow of, use cases, transactions, things like that. So it's a pretty complicated matrix of things to consider.
That's correct.
Yeah. When Raj said data, one of the things that I've thought about on the data side is when we start talking about AI needs clean, consistent, honest data. I feel like we have to start thinking about how we test that to determine if our machine learning is being based off of clean data. And I feel like that's a realm that the testing community has to start thinking about. I don't know if we have yet, but if we look at the future and we look at, building out better machine learning around the DevOps problem in particular, having that clean, solid, consistent data that we can have some historical trends becomes really important. And I have no idea how you test that data. I think it will be an interesting challenge for us.
Yeah, it will be an interesting challenge. And also, when we talk about data, we also need to be more cautious about the data, because we don't want to involve customer data, right? Because of the CPA, we want to make sure that we have data masking in place, so that you are not giving the confidential information of any customer. If at all you are testing AI or any place, we want to make sure that wherever we are talking about data, we are not actually using the right actual customer data, right? That's where data masking will come into the picture.
Is there a difference between data masking and anonymizing the data, or is that the same thing? Right.
So I think anonymizing, you're still doing some kind of, so for example, you are saying, okay, instead of saying Raju Chavan, you are going to say something like anonymous name, but it is still a name. It might be relevant to someone else. And now when we talk about data masking, there should be some tools and technologies which is going to mask the data in such a way that anyone should not be able to recognize that particular customer, right? It could be anything. Even the credit card information, even the address information. So there are a lot of information that needs to be data masked.
Very good. Let's turn our attention to thinking about the tools side of it. Obviously, Tricentis and being in this business, you have a very keen perspective on how customers think about tool selection and integration. I was just working on a study about integrating the DevOps pipeline. What are the considerations around integration, security, automation, telemetry and data that you use, output for decision making and things like that. Martin, maybe if you can, I love that you're in the customer success business. So as you're guiding, and I know we're not doing a commercial for Tricentis, and understandably, but we obviously come with that with our perspectives, right? I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you help customers walk through that decision matrix of maybe they're already using some of your tools, maybe they're new to coming on board. What are some of the things that you ask and help people think through?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, right? Because in our experience, we sometimes run into situations where customers think about tools as a way to solve all the problems, especially people and process and maturity questions, and that's not it. If you think about buy a tool or suite or platform, what have you, and that will solve all the challenges, that may not be the right investment. I think you end up with having tools on the shelf and not getting the value out of the investment. And I think the most important aspect in our view is always to take a step back and look at where are you today, what are you trying to accomplish, where are you having success already, and where do you think there are opportunities to improve speed or automation or reusability or coverage from a tooling perspective, and then figure out what is the right way to do that. Because we've seen customers that have success with scripted automation tools because they have some sort of an engineering team that is really, really good at looking at automation as a product, and therefore it's constantly being maintained, just like your code bases, right? And so they never run into a situation where they're being frustrated with scripts that break, and then they find out too late and spend too much time fixing the scripts rather than adding more automations to the repertoire and library of automations. In our experience, is usually a good sort of starting point to look at where are you today, what is your maturity in general relative to the use of automation tools, for build automation, CI/CD automation, deployment automation, security scanning tools, and so forth. And then also from a team's perspective, what is the skill set that you have, and what's the overall maturity of the teams, and thinking through what needs to be, to your point earlier, Raju, like what needs to be tested, what is what has the biggest business risk from a customer standpoint, and then prioritizing those things as well, because there is a point of diminishing return of automation where the more regression you do, it's not going to sort of filter out any additional issues or defects, but it's going to add time to a deployment cycle. And it's about figuring out how do we run automation in the most optimal way, so that the CSD times don't slow down, but it actually catch the things that need to be tested correctly, right? But I think tools, in my view, is sort of like an important but not the most important aspect of the equation. It's always about the people and the process first and the mindset, and then figure out how do the tools, open source, commercial, what have you, support the process in the most optimal way.
Definitely agree with Martin. Yeah. And as he said, not a tool will solve all your problems, right? You need to identify the right tool to solve your problem. And when you're trying to solve that particular problem, what is the benefit that you're going to get out of that particular problem?
Yeah.
I think we have to look at testing like domains, right? I like to talk about domains because they're important. Because if you can define the domains that you want to ensure testing, then you can add it to your DevOps pipeline or not. You know where it has to be done. You know, production might be a domain, or pen testing might be a domain. Security testing might be a domain. Unit testing is a domain. And what are the tools that best fit those particular domains, and how's the best way to automate them or not? Because there may be a case where this is not something that can be automated, but for the most part, I think most of our testing tools can be. And creating a DevOps testing workflow is a really good way to think about your domains in a different way, and not just dev, test, prod, but what the testing is doing. What is it? What particular area is it serving? And build a pipeline that is appropriate to those domains.
Yeah. And as we are talking about the DevOps and automation, I just want to highlight this to everyone that I think we still have a lot of opportunity to mature in this area, because any tool that you choose, there is no proper integration between the DevOps pipeline and automation, right? It's a patches of work that is being done, right? They are trying to just integrate with patches. It's not a seamless integration that would allow anyone to adapt to this particular framework, right? We don't have a defined framework with a proper integration, and I think that could be one of the reasons that people are not automating including automation into the pipeline, right? There might be just making sure that, okay, one checkbox if my leads are asking me, but if at all, we have not seen any huge focus in this area where we have a seamless integration with automation, test automation, and DevOps.
Now, I'm going to follow up on something Martin said. I'm not sure if you use the term diminishing returns, but there is a point, right, where adding more tests to your test suite doesn't necessarily improve the quality or security of software. How do you know? I mean, how do you know when you're approaching kind of that zone of, are we got enough? Are we over engineering this, overthinking it? How do you recognize that you've kind of entered that zone?
That's a tricky question.
That's the $30 million lottery ticket question.
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
It is.
Because it has to do, and I'd love to get Raju's thoughts on this as well, because it has a lot to do with what is the rate of change? Like, what are you adding over time to your application? Is it incremental? Are you adding new functionality? Is it a new application? And also, what, if you think about modularity, what actually counts as an application in its own right versus a service that's being used in a composite way in other applications? And so, in general, I think automation is a good thing. In general, the more you can continuously, test and validate, that's a good thing. But it does, I would say if you look at sort of your deployment times or cycle times in general, that's oftentimes a good indicator that, okay, so we're slowing down here quite a bit, and now we're waiting, more than we are comfortable with, because it's sort of now we've sort of shifted the bottleneck, downstream just a little bit more, and figuring out, like, is the automation as efficient as possible could be one way to look at, okay, so do we have, what we need, what are we catching, what do we feel, how do we feel about the maturity of the code base, and then where do we feel comfortable maybe to turn off certain things that have been tested a gazillion times that don't need to be retested again. Which has implications on test automation maintenance, right? Because maintenance is not about fixing scripts are broken, but it's also about sort of does my test matrix still reflect accurately what my application looks like? And, do we have aging in our test cases that, we've tested things, 5 years ago. We don't need to retest them again because we feel really good about it. It's stable. It's not changing anymore. But maybe we should focus more on some of the new functionality we're adding, on a more regular basis.
Yeah, definitely agree with Martin. The changes, understanding what changes, and also the other way to look around and understand whether we are doing the right scoping or not is to historical errors. So understand whether what kind of issues you are finding. Is it recurring? In which areas those are primarily focused on, or where are the key issues that I have found in this specific area, which tells you the story. If at all you don't have the configuration management, okay, this could be the area where a lot of changes are getting deployed, right? And that would help us to focus on increasing automation in that particular area. And if there is some areas where you're not finding any issues after running the automation or manual test case, then that is the area where you can minimize your automation or test cases.
And I think that this juncture, we should give a shout out to value stream management tools, because they were really good at showing us where we had bottlenecks and if quality gates were taking way too long. Because when that does happen, developers get frustrated with the testing and they start wanting to break down those bottlenecks and break down those quality gates. But you have to remember, all of this depends on the industry you're in. If you're in banking, if you're in government, you may be okay with having more than needed. And if you're in another industry, you may not care as much. You still care, but you don't care as much as the risk-averse industries. And I think that having the insights to understand how much time it's taking is pretty important to know if you have hit that diminishing return point.
Right.
And sometimes we don't see that in the pipeline. It's hard to see that. And that's where the value stream tools were really helpful.
Like one of the factors is also what kind of things are you not catching, right, in your testing that customers do find, or you find them in production after you've gone through test cycles? And is there a pattern to that, right? Do we have an area where we need to shore up our test cases? It's a funny way to say it, but it's not the test that pass that you're looking for. It's the failures that you want failures to happen, and you want to have them happen as early as possible, so you get a chance to fix it. I used to kind of gut feel software releases by how bad the bugs we were finding, and we were finding some pretty significant, really rough ones, and I could tell if we're not there yet until we start to see some of those things. As the product matures, you get less of that. But you have a sense of what you're finding, the errors you're finding. It also informs you how your testing is going.
Yep.
Am I just crazy, or is that's kind of a sense you also apply, Raju?
That's what we exactly talked about, right, Mitch? So yeah, that's exactly will help you to understand whether we are finding the right errors or not, and we're fixing the right errors or not. Yeah, we're definitely making.
Yeah, I was like, great. I love those big bugs. Like that tells me we're finding good stuff. We're coming up near the end of our time together. There's a couple of ways to kind of approach how we close this. I was thinking about, all of us have been working in the industry a while and shipped a lot of software and have experiences that you learn from your failures as well as your successes. Is there anything that if you rolled back time, maybe back 10 years or so ago, and said, boy, if I would have known what I knew now, this is what I would love to take back to myself 10 years ago and benefit from that knowledge. Any kind of lessons learned, because so much has changed in how we do software now. If you knew you were going to be doing microservices 10 years from now, right? You're like, oh, I might rethink about how I do this. Tracy, I'm gonna impinge on you and ask you to go first on maybe a tough question.
Okay.
Maybe it's an easy one.
It's a tough one, because there's so many areas that we have, fallen on our face over the years with companies I've been with, and you're embarrassed by it. But I think it goes back to something that Raju reminded me of, and I always still forget it. It's the broader integration testing that will always get you. especially if you're passing data across and somebody changes one little component, even, a memory boundary. Those are the hardest tests to do, and they're the most embarrassing bugs to find. So I think I would have told myself, focus more on integration testing and really get it down.
Yeah, the things you can't control in your code, right?
Exactly.
And
Yeah,
I would take it back, like I would have focused, or if at all, I would have owned a team. I would have told them to make sure that you're focusing on the configuration management and dependency, because this was going to help you. If you build this configuration management from the beginning itself, then you are not going to spend a lot of amount of work in the future. So if at all you keep updating that particular configuration management and dependency from the beginning itself, then it will be easy it will make everyone's job easy, even the developers and testers, and even the product owners who is going to understand this particular product or software.
excellent.
I would add that it's important to not forget about the human in the loop. I know we've talked about that in the context of AI, but at the end of the day, we're delivering an experience, right?
Yep.
It doesn't matter if the functionality checks out fine and there are no issues from a test data standpoint, but if it's not usable, if it's not engaging, if it's not something that you would love to actually interact with, then all the effort is actually not going to yield the kind of result that you're hoping for. Because at the end of the day, we're still building software for humans, and we have to think about the application from an end user perspective above all. And that relates to the functionality, that relates to the requirements, that relates to the things that we can automate as well. And if you really think about it that way, to say, like, if I was a user coming into this, like, how would I feel about interacting with the software, and does it want me to come back and recommend it to others? And I think what Apple and Google and other sort of App Store has done is they have really created awareness for user ratings. I feel like we need this type of rating system for enterprise software as well, in many cases. But I think that will influence and inform a lot of the automation strategies or test management strategies or value stream and other things that we use, and the techniques, the process and tools to deliver software that actually is engaging and exciting for our end customers.
Yeah, I think that the word there is empathy. Something actually I learned from an interview on Tech Strong Women, a woman who is really into UX. And she talked about how important empathy was for your end users and having true empathy for them. And that is a responsibility of testers.
Extremely good point. Something that I went through an experience where it was during an economic downturn, and I ended up spending about 1.5 years, almost 2 years, part-time on the road doing, we call it customer testing then, but it was user experience testing of software we were designing. And I walked away with this sort of like, wow, I never would have guessed. It's the unintended uses of software that really stretch the boundaries. Like, I remember developers saying, well, you're not supposed to do that with our software. Well, people do. Or you're not supposed to use it that way. Well, people do. And so it's kind of expand the bounds of the discrete definition of a test plan or a test suite or a design. There are outer edges that gets expanded to beyond what we intended software, how it might behave or how it might use, and kind of keep an open mind and look for those. What might seem like edge cases, but you never know. You might have a great product shift in what your product can do, because suddenly you found a new problem that it solves you didn't know it was going to. So there's some really insightful things. If you just kind of think of it as a continuous learning, not I'm shooting for delivering X and that's all I'm after. So if that makes sense to everybody, to me, it was really like, wow, I had no idea people would do those kind of things. I learned so much from talking with people who are actually using the software. So to your point, well, thank you, all three of you. It's been a ton of fun. It's always great to get into the kind of details of this topic. And I hope folks that joined us today looking for some insights in automating testing got more than that. They got that, but also got configuration management, user experience, human in the loop, thinking about integration testing more thoroughly. So many kind of nuggets that I think any of us could pick out and use. So, Raj, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so
Tracy, as always, and of course, Martin, we really enjoy having you. All three of you bring such a great perspective. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. Special thanks to Tricentis again for sponsoring this program and bringing people like this together to talk about some really useful and helpful topics. So I hope you tune in again, and we will be back with another episode of DevOps Unbound. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.